Welcome again, Rowan. I'm speaking again with Rear Admiral retired Rowan Moffitt AO, the former Fleet Commander and Deputy Chief of the Royal Australian Navy. Good to be with you again, Rowan.
Well, it's good to be with you again, Saul, talking on these very topical issues.
When we started these conversations a few weeks ago, the launching point was the early stages of what turned out to be a circumnavigation of most of Australia by a flotilla from the Chinese People Liberation Army. As we're recording this now, there's another Chinese vessel, not a military one, close to Australia's shores. What do you think they're doing, and is it as important as the last event of this nature?
The presence of the Chinese survey ship is, in my view, quite significant. And were we to be doing something similar in the South China Sea, you could expect that China would respond quite vigorously. Surveying seabeds, for whatever reason, as close as it appears this ship is, really ought to alert people to the sort of messaging that's going on. Why would they be doing it? And there are a number of reasons why they might be doing it. Some of those include critical infrastructure like seabed cables on which global internet connectivity relies, and about more than 95% of internet traffic globally is carried on seabed cables, not via satellites. So they really are quite critical infrastructure to every minute of every day of life in the connected world, and we're certainly part of that. So surveying our seabed or seabed close to Australia could be for that, for exploratory reasons, for looking for places where a submarine might be able to sit on the bottom quietly and not land on a bunch of rocks when it tried to do that, and sit and wait and watch, or other reasons as well. But it is something that we ought to be, and I'm quite sure the government is paying very close attention to its movements and activities, whether that be via the Australian Defence Force surveillance system or something else. But yes, I think it is a very significant development. We have seen the Chinese involved in survey operations off the coast previously, but it's always been part of something else, like the search for Malaysian Airlines MH70 off the west coast of Australia. That was well out into international waters, but as a consequence of the Chinese surveying those areas looking for wreckage, they went away with a vast stock of data of information about the seabed off Australia that under normal organisational rules internationally they would share with us, and I'm not sure if they have or they haven't. And that was all done with our knowledge. But to be having the ship there, there's been no suggestion made that this is with our knowledge or with our agreement or that we understand the purpose, and that's worrying.
And presumably, as an island nation like New Zealand and Japan and the UK, we're more vulnerable than countries that have land borders to any interruption to those or damage done to those undersea cables.
Oh, we absolutely are. And the disruption that can be caused, recognising how very few cables, seabed cables there are that connect Australia with the rest of the world, the amount of time it takes to repair them is perhaps not as great as people might think, but it does take time, and there are a limited number of repair vessels. If the damage done to any of them is done maliciously, it would be carefully planned to make it as hard as possible for us. And this, of course, is just one of the ways that I think China's demonstrating that it can impact on Australia's daily circumstances many other ways than just militarily, and have really quite profound impacts. I couple this with also recent announcements made from China about their having created systems specifically designed to cut seabed cables.
And we have, of course, seen on the other side of the world, in the Baltic Sea, communications and other cables cut, presumably deliberately, probably not by China. Is this a precursor of something that might conceivably happen in our region?
The timing of the ship's presence with the other announcement relating to capabilities to cut seabed cables together, I think, intended to be a clear message to Australia of China's capabilities, not necessarily their intent. And as we discussed previously, a threat has to have two components, capability and intent. What they're demonstrating is capability, and intent may or may not come in the future. We should be taking this quite seriously.
Right. So in that sense, there is a sort of parallel with what you said about the circumnavigation by military vessels, naval vessels, a couple of months ago. You did talk then about capability and intent as well, and they were certainly demonstrating their capability then, if not any particular intention.
That's true. And I think I also said at the time that we can expect that any nation of the nature of China, which is now, as we discussed, probably the largest economy in the world and is certainly a nation operating the largest navy in the world, alongside which it has a truly massive mercantile fleet, both cargo and 17,000 Chinese flagged fishing vessels. We talked about drones and swarms of drones, and a swarm of even part of 17,000 fishing vessels, which are likely all to be connected, networked together in communications terms. This is of consequence, I said, and I reiterate, that we should expect to see the Chinese Navy demonstrating China's ability to be on the world's oceans wherever it chooses, whenever it likes.
As I think we said in our earlier conversation, this is obviously one of the critical ways in which Australia's strategic environment is undergoing fundamental and rapid change. The other one, of course, is the stance now being taken by the Trump administration in the United States, in particular towards its so-called traditional allies in Europe, Canada, and maybe to some extent here in Australia. Now, that's relevant because this week you participated in a summit hosted by former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull to discuss some of these increasingly important geo-strategic issues. I wonder if you'd like to say anything in general about what you learned at that summit before we home in on a couple of key issues that were raised at it.
Certainly. The first thing I'd observe is that I wouldn't be absolute about this statement, but I would observe that I can't think of another time where two linked events such as these, a forum at the National Press Club, invitation only, for a bit over 100 people of a variety of specialist fields, hosted and orchestrated. Malcolm Turnbull was the MC, and he paid for it as well. Then to be followed the next day by a National Press Club address, which has been televised and I think is very good listening. I would observe that no matter what you think about Malcolm Turnbull, he did a very good job on both days. I don't recollect there having ever been anything quite like that in respect of a private citizen of the stature of and history of Malcolm Turnbull putting out such a logical and sensible, and I thought very well thought through proposal that under the circumstances that we have facing national security, there are some questions here that governments really are duty-bound to examine, and there's no indication that they actually are. And
there was, as I understand it, a range of viewpoints presented to this summit. They weren't all coming from one particular perspective.
Oh, absolutely true. I mean, there was quite a range of perspectives. There were some very eminent people who participated, the likes of Gareth Evans, who brought a very powerful and cogent perspective as a previous foreign minister. Dennis Richardson as a previous head of ASIO and ambassador to Washington and Secretary of the Department of Defence, very strongly held views. There was an element of the discussion that was focused around Aukus, the Australia-UK-US treaty to, in part, provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. But that didn't dominate the whole day. The whole day was much broader and much higher, much more strategic than that as well. And there was a lot of good information about the Aukus program that was shared and challenged and debated, and it was a good day. There were some very interesting perspectives, and of course there were many other people in the room as well. And it was a very open and engaging day's exchange of ideas, something that I must say I warm to enormously as I get older and realise how little I know about things, and that is that I value highly a contest of ideas. And there was certainly a contest of ideas there on Monday. The forum on Monday will be, I understand, being made public in segments. Each of the 4 sessions will be a podcast in its own right, which will be published. I'm not sure how, but Malcolm Turnbull did say that's what would happen. And of course, the Press Club presentation on Tuesday is available online now.
Well, certainly that will make interesting reading or viewing when it is released. I often find myself thinking or saying that one of the great joys in life is to find yourself in a room of people who are smarter than I am or who know more about the subject at hand than I do. And this is certainly a subject in which I wouldn't claim to know very much at all. But since one of the focuses of the summit you attended was the Aukus agreement, there are a lot of questions emerging about that, including whether at the end of the day the US will have the capacity and the will to deliver the Virginia-class submarines that they're supposedly committed to doing, the capacity of the UK to supply the ones subsequently, and our capacity to do what we need to do in Australia, including operating those submarines. And there also seem to be at least some questions around what the AUKUS treaty ultimately commits Australia to do in various hypothetical scenarios. Perhaps it would be good to hear your views, Rowan, about some of those issues in whatever order you feel like taking them, with the uncertainty that now exists around the trustworthiness and reliability of the US under Donald Trump and perhaps under those who might succeed him. Do we need to be rethinking the commitments we've entered into under AUKUS?